Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Welcome along. So glad you could be with us. I'm Andrew Charlton, and this is Eurocontrol Aviation StraightTalk Live. This is the program where we talk about what's going on in the aviation industry at the moment in these very troubled times, what it is that we can do, what it is that we are doing, and how it is that we will build back better. And once we've built back better, what does better look like? It's a topic that ranges across all of aviation. It's not just about airlines. It's not just about airports. And today we're going to talk to one of the absolute lions of the aerospace industry, of the entire aviation industry, the CEO of Airbus, the largest airframe manufacturer in the world, of course, Mr. Guillaume Faury. And I'm delighted that he can be here and can share with us his views on what's going on and what happens next. A lot of things to talk about, of course, but as ever, first, I'm going to ask the Director General of Eurocontrol, Mr. Raymond Brennan, if he'd bring us up to date with the current market outlook. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest edition of Straight Talk from Eurocontrol here in Brussels, and a special welcome to Guillaume, CEO of Airbus, and Andrew, of course, who will do the interview for us. Today, it's interesting to look at the way the market has developed over the last number of weeks. And you can see that, by and large, we've had a marginal increase. And I'm saying 19% because what's rising is cargo, what's rising is domestic operations, and, of course, the VFR flying season in Europe. But normal operations are still severely impacted by the pandemic. I think it's also worthwhile just to have a quick look at who the top 10 airlines have been over the last week compared to 2019. Significant operations by Turkish Airlines. Have a look there at Air France, Lufthansa, right throughout the network. Interesting point there is the largest network carrier, Ryanair, down by 91%. That's really interesting. And when we look at the analysis in the detail of this, it's worth looking at how the major cargo carriers have performed. Cargo, for instance, is up 9% over 2019, and you would expect this in a pandemic. But what's interesting is to have a look at, for instance, DHL, those that are carrying large contracts from Amazon, etc., doing very, very well. And of course, UPS as well. So the cargo sector is doing quite well and continues to do quite well. And by and large, it's sustaining the airports and it's sustaining the air traffic management system at the moment. Also, let's have a look at the long haul. What's interesting here is focus on British Airways, an 88% reduction, down to 110 flights a day, of which about 90% of that is cargo. And as you can imagine, the same with Lufthansa, SAS, and of course Air France. And when we look at the low-cost carriers, you can see also, for instance, the same applies. First of all, Pegasus from Turkey is the largest low-cost carrier in the Eurocontrol system. Look at Vueling, 78% operating from Barcelona, and you can see Wizz, based out of Budapest, 69%. So right across the sector, no big change from the last time that I actually talked to you there. So all in all, low-cost carriers, 84% reduction. What it's also worth looking at really is this whole vaccine issue. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about the rate of vaccine rollout in the European Union, and hopefully we expect that after Easter, with the increase in the vaccine supply, particularly in the latter half of April, May and June, that we will see vaccines rolled out considerably. And this is the key to opening the market. And I think all of the carriers are very much looking forward to major progress on vaccines in the next number of months. Also, when you look at, for instance, the share of market of Airbus versus Boeing, and it's very, very interesting. If you go back to 2008, Airbus had a 27% share, and this had risen to about 40% share of the European market by 2020. So you can see that really good progress by Airbus over a short period of time. Because remember, breaking into a new market for a visionary company like Airbus back in the 1980s was a major undertaking. And Airbus is a major European achievement, and I'm really proud to have them with us here today. Also, it's worth looking at, production in Airbus. Like us, like Eurocontrol, like every single airline, they have been impacted by the pandemic with employment issues, but also a huge cutback in production. And this has been mirrored also by their major competitors. So today, you know, I think what's going to be really interesting is to hear Guillaume and Andrew discuss the whole issue of decarbonisation, hydrogen, all of the new technologies that Airbus are exploring in Europe. So enjoy today's interview. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope to see you again after Easter when we have another guest, which will be John Holland Kay, the CEO of London Heathrow Airport. So enjoy.
Guillaume, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Straight Talk.
Hi, Andrew.
Guillaume, last time you and I spoke, which was towards the end of last year, I asked you, what does the aerospace industry need to recover? Do you remember what you said?
I think I said we need to have passengers back in flight.
Indeed. It struck me at the time as interesting that you were so focused on customers rather, and indeed your customers' customers, not your customers at all. How do you think it's going?
Depends which part of the world. We have indeed a very scattered situation. And in Europe, where we are today, it's not going well. And beginning of 2021 is indeed very disappointing, still with a lot of lockdowns and measures to prevent people from traveling, quarantines, need for tests and so on, which are not coordinated and not harmonized. And the changes in space and in time make it very difficult for passengers to plan to fly and to travel. If you look at the US, things are recovering. In Asia, in particular in China, things are going quite okay for regional traffic. Obviously, the international traffic, it's still very low. And if we want to have a couple of rough figures, just to have orders of magnitude in mind, for international traffic, it's roughly 20 to 25% of what it was in 2019 that we use as a reference. In the US, we are above 60%, probably between 60 to 70% for the regional traffic. In China, the regional traffic is at slightly more than 100% of what it was in 19 already. And if we look at Europe, we are in the ballpark of 30 to 40%. So it shows that Europe is by far the region where the impact on traffic still beginning of 2021 is the toughest.
Airbus is an extremely international company. I mean, it sells to airlines all over the world. How important is the European market to you then?
It's important. You have US, Europe, China, Asia and China, Middle East, South America, and then Africa, which is much smaller. So Europe is an important part of our market, probably something like 15%, in number of deliveries. So it's very significant.
Right. So how did Airbus react when the COVID pandemic struck? What sort of internal measures did you take?
Well, it was a shock on the supply, on the demand at the same time. It was difficult to have people coming to the office or to the plant for working. So we organized a crisis cell with the executive management of the company, meeting virtually and later physically for some of them in Toulouse every day. And then we reacted by first addressing the health issues and the health of people, of employees. That was the top priority, to try to understand what was happening. We've been quite lucky to have the first hit in China first with our Chinese operations. That gave us time to understand what the likely measures could be. And we used a lot what we have learned in China a bit ahead of the rest of the world to deploy our measures. So first we addressed the health issue. Then we looked at the supply chain and to address all the stakes, the concerns, the questions, the issues with the logistics. It was very short term. We looked at the demand and trying to figure out as quickly as we could what would be the impact, what could the impact be for 2020. We went to the financial markets to raise liquidity, and that was a very important part of what we did very early in the crisis, to be able to manage the downturn being safe on the liquidity side, and this has been very helpful. And a couple of weeks later, we were producing again at new rates. We negotiated with customers based on their individual request, demand, and their own understanding of the situation. Deferrals, postponement of PDPs, and reorganizing the flow of money and planes and services as well with customers to help them manage the situation, because we were all hit at the same time. It's incredible the global scale of that crisis at the same time for everybody in the industry. And we reorganized our supply plans as well to give visibility to all suppliers. We really wanted to define a certain level of stability for everybody to be able to plan and to organize. And this is finally what worked quite well in the second quarter of 2020. Then moving forward, we went from adaptation to adaptation, but that was basically what we did in the second quarter of 2020 that gave the pace for where we are today.
Really quite an extensive and full-ranging response. But even in the crisis of last year, you did deliver some aeroplanes, didn't you?
We delivered 566 commercial planes, which is 35% less than what we did in 2019.
I'm almost trying to work out who wanted new aeroplanes last year. I thought everything was about not flying and not having aeroplanes.
Well, people take delivery of planes not for the flight of tomorrow. They take planes for a long period of time. The lifetime of a plane is between 20 to 30 years, and it's a long lead time product. So still many airlines were looking at the 2020 situation with the perspective of the recovery and going out of the pandemic. And we saw as many ways of dealing with the pandemic short term as airlines, and even they had to adapt over time. So with some airlines, we had 2, even sometimes 3 rounds of discussion, negotiation to see how to rearrange the pre-delivery payments, the delivery of the planes, and those kind of things. And we were helped. The industry was helped with a lot of financing, mainly from the lessors, but not only, to be able to support airlines without impacting their balance sheet at the moment, where they had to take delivery of planes.
So what is your prediction? What do you think the airlines are going to look like 5, 10 years from now?
Well, I think everybody is looking at when will the recovery really be there? And then is there any long-term impact of the pandemic on the shape of the demand, be it for leisure, for what we call VFR, visit friends and relatives, or business travel? Not everything is clear, and airlines and everybody in this industry is trying to figure out what this new demand will look like. But I think it's reasonable to say it will be not very different from what it was before. And then the time it takes to be back to 2019 figures is really what we are trying to understand better. And we think on the single aisle business, on the narrow body planes, it's probably going to be around 2023. And for the wide body business, 24, 25, we don't really know. There is more uncertainty on how fast and how strong the international traffic will recover.
But on the wide body business, obviously, I can't not ask you about the A380, the ultimate wide body aeroplane, perhaps. A glorious piece of engineering, incredibly quiet. But even when the industry recovers, you're not looking at wide body aircraft of the sort of size and magnitude of the A380 again, are you?
We have decided to stop the production of the A380 in late 2018, I think. And we've been quite lucky that it happened before we were hit by the pandemic, because we've seen some sort of acceleration of the trends in the pandemic. Our wide body business now is supported by the 330neo and the 350, which are twin engine planes, and we think these are excellent planes for the future. The 380 will continue to fly, and it will probably remain the aircraft of choice for many, many passengers, because it is indeed a fantastic flight experience for passengers. But the production is finished, so it will be now about supporting those planes as long as possible. and I'm sure many people will try to and will want to fly the 380 for what it is. Sometimes more the plane than the destination when it comes to the 380. But yes, the production phase of the program is clearly behind us.
Right. And so the future of the long haul fleet effectively is going to be the 350 and to some extent the 330 Neo, you think?
330 Neo and 350, yes, with different positioning of the two planes.
Right. The other aeroplane that has really done well for you, dare I say, in the last little while seems to be the A321LR, which is a narrow body aeroplane on the long haul fleet or the long haul routes, the long haul market. Do you see that as a trend that we're going to see more of?
Indeed. We've been very happy with the commercial success of the LR, the long range version of the 321. As you know, we are currently developing the A321 XLR, which is with an even longer range than the LR. We have a good backlog, and the aircraft will enter into service in 2023. And we see that this is attracting a lot of interest from airlines for different reasons. But we see the trend going for long distance, very versatile single aisle planes, the LR, the XLR, being a long lasting one. And indeed, the pandemic has probably put even more light on that segment.
But that brings me back to my question, if you like, about what the airlines are going to look like 5 years from now, perhaps. If the 21LR and the A350 are the sort of long-haul aeroplanes of choice, then that means the airlines themselves will have to have been somewhat reshaped, doesn't it?
But there's not one model of airline. There's a huge diversity of airlines around the world. Some are already specialized on single aisle. You have the low cost operating regionally. Sometimes they've almost benefited from the pandemic in certain regions of the world or for certain brands. Then you have other kind of carriers which are with planes from the smallest single aisle to the A380 or very large dual engine wide body. So there is not a single model of airline, but maybe there are some trends that we can share. First, they look at the post-pandemic situation with smaller modules. They want to have more versatile planes so they can have more agility, managing the seasonality of the demand or reshaping their network as things are moving. They want to have less expensive assets. They want to be able to open new routes, and sometimes they start with thin routes, and therefore starting with a long range single aisle is a good way to test a route, potentially putting a wide body at a later stage. So we see this need for agility and lower exposure when it comes to the assets themselves. But it goes therefore with the leasing market on the one hand, and what I call smaller modules or adaptable planes like the 321, and that's the kind of things we see.
Right. So what you're painting, though, I think, is an image of the airlines that is somewhat different to the image of the airlines in 2019. Even if all it is, and I think you said this, is an acceleration of the trends that we were seeing anyway, that trend, those trends are going to accelerate very quickly now, aren't they?
Again, very different situations, airline by airline, and depending on the regions. We see some airlines coming stronger compared to their competition after the pandemic. For some areas of the world, like Europe, we're still not out of the woods, and airlines remain a bit in a wait and see mode, trying to limit their cash out to be prepared to accelerate again. We think there will be even more diversity of situations after the pandemic than we had before, and it was already a lot before the pandemic. So I think it's very difficult to say the airlines will. We have to say this airline, that airline, but not the same situation for all of them.
Right, interesting. What about the lessor market? Because clearly lessors are an important part of your customer base, leaving everything else aside. Do you see much change or much reorganisation there?
We've seen recently the move with GCAS and AirCap, and it's a very important
mega merger.
one. Yeah, big merger of the two big lessors in the market. Well, what I'd like to say is they've played a very important role in 2020 and will keep doing the same in 2021. They've maintained the ability to deliver plane, to take delivery, and this was extremely important in this very moment. also for the supply chain. And I think we have to look at the lessors as one of the enablers of the management, the decent management of the crisis. And they've played really a crucial role. And I think they play a growing role. When we compare the situation with what it was 10 years ago, they are now really completely part of the industry. They own a very large number of planes. They move assets in a very professional way, and that's extremely important. It helps maintaining residual values for the assets, which has been very important in the pandemic. So indeed, the lessors, they really play a crucial role in that situation.
Interesting. Can we move perhaps on to sustainability and the whole discussion around that? I read the other day that your largest competitor, Boeing, I suspect you're not allowed to use their name, but I am, so said that they're aiming to get their entire fleet of products flying on sustainable aviation fuel by 2035. You, on the other hand, have gone down a different road, haven't you? You've said you want to go to hydrogen power by 2035. Do you think hydrogen's the future? What about sustainable aviation fuel?
I'd like to correct a misunderstanding. We are not saying it's hydrogen and it's not sustainable fuels. It's both. And on the contrary, on the very short term, the sustainable aviation fuels will play definitely a very important role. And we were very clear on that already 2-3 years ago. We are accelerating in that direction. But we are seeing also on top of sustainable aviation fuels, hydrogen will play a big role and probably a growing role. So it's not one against the other, it's and, okay? It's
right.
in dessert, I would say, with my French culture. Huh? It's first and big time sustainable aviation fuels. We need to go faster. Our planes today, Airbus planes, are certified for 50% of SAFs, of sustainable aviation fuels, inside the mix of kerosene for each and every plane, every plane we deliver today. But it's not used in service to that extent. We see a use actually below 1%. So
0.05, not 50.
Yeah, exactly. Significantly below 1%. So we really need to do a big effort, regulators, states, suppliers, airlines, to use SAFs where they can be used. We want to go to 100% of use of SAFs on board airplanes, and you've seen that we've made recent flight tests to go in that direction. We are testing actually on an A350 on one side of the plane, on one engine, the 100% to learn and to collect data and to be able to go to that direction. But then at a later stage, we think hydrogen has also a big role to play. As with hydrogen, you don't release carbon in the air.
Yeah.
You release carbon in the air that you have taken in a way or the other from the air before. But still, you have carbon going in and out. With hydrogen, it's not the case.
No, you do release water, though, of course, at very high altitude. But you have committed very strongly to your hydrogen aeroplane, you're planning, an aeroplane 0E. I'm hoping by 2035 you come up with a better name for it. And also some really interesting futuristic looking blended wing aeroplanes. How's that going? Do you think that's going to be a success?
We think it's going to happen. These are the different architectures we are looking at, among others, but these are the main ones we're looking at for the future hydrogen planes. The blended wing is a very interesting concept because it's very well suited for high volume of fuel inside the airplane, which will be required for hydrogen.
Right.
You know, hydrogen is light compared to kerosene, but it's bulky. It takes a lot of volume compared to kerosene for the same amount of energy on board. And therefore, to go to a certain distance, you need more volume of fuel on board. And that's why we're looking at different architectures. But indeed, we think entering into service in 2035 makes sense because it gives us around 5 years to mature the technologies. And we're working on them now big time. Then you have sort of 2 years to prepare the launch of the program, which is what we do normally, to find the suppliers, to find the location for production, to fund the program, and then launch 27, 28, sort of 7-8 years later, you enter into service. And that's very likely, that's very credible. Now, it doesn't mean that all the solutions are on the table. Obviously, hydrogen is not a new technology, but hydrogen on planes means a lot of development, a lot of engineering. We will test a lot of different solutions to select the best one and make sure we can then turn it into a reliable, safe, of course, solution that can be certified and then entered into service. What we need as well is not only a plane, a good plane, is a regulatory framework. So we will need to work with regulators to define those new rules for those kind of planes. We need a level playing field for those regulations. That's why I'm very happy to see the US being back in the Paris Agreement and looking at climate in a very serious way. So we'll be together addressing those topics, and also China, with the President Xi Jinping having announced recently that China wants to be carbon neutral by 2060. And the third thing we need by 2035 are large quantities of decarbonized hydrogen at airports. And obviously we are far from being there, but still we have 5 years to get there. And when we see the big momentum on hydrogen in many industries, we think that that's really good to see. That's very encouraging.
Right. How do I say this politely? Airframe manufacturers have in the past failed to meet their original timeframes for the delivery of new aircraft. Did I say that neatly? Are you confident 2035 is really doable?
Yes, we are. It doesn't mean we'll make it. It doesn't mean it will be a walk in the park. There will be many, many challenges. And well, even if we are late by a couple of years, that's not the point, because it's such a big revolution to decarbonize aviation that we will take the time it needs to do the right things. But 5 years for maturing the technologies is something very reasonable. And if we get there by 2025, we know we have the technologies in hands to be in service by 2035. It will be a first plane. It will take time before we transform all the fleet into fully decarbonized planes, but we need to start somewhere. And as I said before, in the meantime, we will make big use of sustainable aviation fuels, plus we will continue to reduce the fuel burn of planes, and there are other ideas than the plane itself to contribute to it. So it's a mix, it's a menu of solutions, and hydrogen is one of them.
Right. What sort of changes would be necessary at the airports to accommodate hydrogen aeroplanes?
Hydrogen fuel being made available.
But would they need to change the way in which it's transferred, or would they need bigger tanks? As you said, it's more bulky than kerosene.
Yeah, it will be a different supply system. You cannot mix it with kerosene. What is good with the SAFs, so-called drop-in, you can put it directly into the kerosene. It's a mix. You put it in your tank like you do when you refill at the station for your car. Well, for hydrogen, it's a completely different fuel. It will be liquid hydrogen, so the infrastructure will be very, very different from what it is today, and there will be the need for infrastructure investment. That's why it will not be something that will happen very quickly. That's why we believe it's not a big deal that we start small before going bigger at a later stage, because we will need to see this transformation of infrastructure at the airports. This being said, we are very happy to partner already with some airports, and including the ones we are not partnering with, which are working on implementing hydrogen storage at their place, to start by fueling buses and ground equipment that they would transform from conventional fuels, fossil fuels, to hydrogen as a first step to learn to use hydrogen at the airport. And this is already ongoing with some airports. So that's why it makes me very comfortable that it's doable by 2035 to have gone from kerosene to kerosene plus hydrogen to then liquid hydrogen before we ultimately probably have only hydrogen on airports. But we are far from that situation. That's just the path that we are defining.
Indeed. And whilst a number of the aeroplanes that you've so far prototyped for the hydrogen look like normal aeroplanes, the blended wing aeroplane is going to need quite a lot of change at the airport as well, isn't it, in terms of gates and piers and things like that?
Not necessarily. That's something we're looking at and weighting the benefits and the downsides of a plane with a very different architecture. on board with still a good aerodynamic performance and a good airplane performance. It comes with some constraints on board. People will not be seated in the same way. You have to look at the evacuation, but you have to look as well at the onboarding, outboarding of people, the speed and the time it takes, the luggage. So this kind of architecture come with more challenges when it comes to those kind of questions. That's why we are looking as well at conventional formulas.
Right. And is on the blended wing aircraft, would the skeleton of the airframe look rather like the skeleton of a normal of a traditional aeroplane?
No, it will be very different.
In what way?
The structure of the plane is not like a tube and wings. No, it's really the architecture is completely different. So it's a different airframe. It's a different way of storing fuel on board. So it's a completely different architecture.
Wow. Really interesting. But what about electric aeroplanes? Do you think electric's got a role in that mix where you talk about SAFs and hydrogen and what have you?
But in hydrogen planes, actually, you have two kinds of technologies. One is what we call H2 burn or hydrogen burn. You burn hydrogen in a jet engine, very similarly to what we do with kerosene, but it's hydrogen. So the combustion is different. Okay. Another way is to go with fuel cells. And with fuel cells, actually, you have an electric engine, an electric plane. Okay.
Right.
You have an electric motor. I'm not suggesting we'll start with fuel cell. We think it's further out. There's more complexity, there's more weight, there's heating or cooling, large cooling systems required because large part of the energy goes into heat. So that comes at a later stage, but there will be a convergence of electric propulsion and hydrogen on board. So for us, electric planes at that scale are not planes powered by batteries. The weight penalty for batteries is by far too high because the energy density of the battery is low compared to hydrogen, but hydrogen could go for propulsion or non-propulsion equipment as the way to electrify the plane. And one idea is to have the APU not powered by kerosene, but powered by hydrogen and being therefore an electric APU.
Right. Your background was originally in helicopters. You then spent some time in a car company. Talking about electric/hydrogen aeroplanes, helicopters and cars, it seems like a perfect moment to talk about flying taxis and what's called UAM, urban aerial mobility or advanced aerial mobility. Airbus seemed to be very keen on that for a while, but in recent times it seems to have become somewhat more silent. Are you pulling out of that area?
Not at all. We are maybe less vocal, but we are testing, we are flying. We continue to work on urban air mobility. You know, we flew already two concepts. One that was called Vahana in the US, very successfully. And then more recently, another one in Germany. And also very successfully, a very different formula. Well, we continue to believe in this industry for the future. It's probably a bit more further out than what most people think, because there are also on urban air mobility a lot of challenges. But we play in that playground for two reasons. First, we believe there will be a business on the long term, and we want to be in that business. That fits very much with our values, our objectives of decarbonized aviation, serving mobility of people, but also because of the technologies. These small vehicles are a fantastic platform for testing at a small scale electric technologies, electric propulsion, fail small, try again, and learn very fast. And then when we have something that works, to be able to use it on air taxis, but also to scale it up for commercial aviation. That's why we are a very serious player in this business for its own merits, but also to serve our other businesses, including helicopters, by the way.
Right. When you say you think the introduction is further away than a lot of other people, what sort of time frame do you have in mind?
We think the second half of the decade is probably something that makes sense for the first applications. It's good to have one or two objects flying, but before we have a real service that is in place with the regulation, with the public acceptance, something that has a business case that works, we think there is still time to mature all of this. But this will come. And I was saying 2-3 years ago, 2025. I say now the second half of the decade. So it just shows that it takes more time to mature. There are many concepts. A lot of people are investing in that segment, and not everybody will make it to the end. But it's a segment that is quite exciting for engineers and others.
Well, indeed, indeed. I remember seeing some prototype or a drawing of a vertiport, as they're to be called, above Gare du Nord in Paris. And the target then was for the Paris Olympics of 2024. You're saying realistically we're going to go past that now, which fair enough, I suppose.
No, I think the Paris 2024 objective remains as a date for demonstrating the vehicles and the technology, and to attract attention, and to sort of prototype and demonstrate what it could look like at a later stage at scale. Okay. Mm-hmm. So no, I think the Paris Olympic Games is still a very important milestone, and we like to think it's a good milestone to make demonstrations.
Given your background, part of your background was in the motor car industry. Do you think it's interesting that so many car manufacturers are getting into the flying taxi, let's be gross, the flying taxi market?
Well, I think we are not yet there. They are looking at it, and they're quite curious about what it could look like and whether it would take a bit in their business or complement their business. We've been discussing with a lot of car manufacturers to see how, and we started partnerships to see how this could make sense for both parties, but we've decided to go our own way. And there's a lot of things happening in this sector at the moment. Small companies, startups, SPACs, but also large car companies looking at it. It shows what we were saying before. It's a very interesting segment for the future.
Right. Moving slightly away from that again for a moment, although of course UTM is a part of that as well. Before the COVID crisis, we had massive capacity crunches, certainly in Europe, that were driven by shortfalls in ATM and so forth. Is the pandemic and the downturn an opportunity for us to change the way in which we control aeroplanes, do you think?
Yes, indeed.
Why aren't we doing it?
I wish we would have been faster on this. It's really a matter of coming together and agreeing. It's not rocket science. It's a bit more complex than what we might think, but still it can be done. And it's quite frustrating to see that we have a potential for more efficiency, less cost, less CO2 emission, which is at reach, and we are not doing it. So yes, I think it's the pressure coming from environment is another reason to accelerate on that side of the equation for aviation. Let's do it.
One of the things Airbus suggested at one stage was flying in close formation, flying like a fleet of geese, if you like. Is that realistic?
Yes, it is. Honestly, at the beginning, I was not very convinced, and I challenged my engineers and then listened to their rationale and to how this would be achieved. So we continue to work on it. It would require cooperation between airlines, but we have now understood what would the mechanism, what would the scheme look like, so they can share the benefits. And for long distance flights, it makes a lot of sense. It's also easier to control from an ATM perspective. So there are many benefits. It's not the ultimate solution, but it can be part of the solutions to significantly reduce the carbon emissions. So yeah, it's more likely to happen than not, in my view.
Wow. I mean, I assume the lead aeroplane every now and then just sort of drops off and comes back to the back like cyclists on a track or something like that.
No, it's the sharing on the cost by a compensating mechanism. You have one following the other one, and you stay stable for the whole duration of the flight information.
Right. So, of course, the airplane at the front doesn't have to burn any more fuel. It's the same as he's currently burning.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. Right. That's really interesting that we're going to do that. It shows too, I think, one of the problems, if you like, which is that aeroplanes are technologically incredibly advanced now and can control to within a metre of their wingtips, can control what's going on around them. But yet we still control them from an ATM perspective, like they're aeroplanes built in the 1950s. So my final question to you, that little bit of editorial aside, my final question to you is the question I always ask at the end, which is what do you think Eurocontrol can do to help to bring some of these things about and can help us all recover and to come back to a future that's as optimistic as you're painting it?
Well, first, I think we have the optimization of the trajectories and the simplification and avoiding the waste. I think that's really on the agenda already. We need to make it happen. On the longer term, one important transition that will be facing aviation. We discussed a lot about environment. I think the second one is about automation, is about safety. And we see the autopilots and the flight control systems, the fly-by-wire planes are by far safer than they were at the beginning because of the role of automation. And it means we have to find ways to have a dialogue between the plane and the ground, which is more automated, which is more consistent with computer times, IT times, where today it's like with the old phone and you speak to each other via the VHF, sort of. Obviously, we have to transition from pure audio to more digital ways of exchanging and then preparing single pilot operations and probably at a much later stage, fully automated planes, at least for a certain part of the flight. So there's a lot happening in the industry, in many industries. In aviation, I think we are super focused on safety and we have an incredible track record. When you think that we are flying passengers at 1,000 kilometers per hour, at 10,000 meters, minus 50 degrees Celsius, and that's the safest way to go from A to B, that's just amazing. That's why we have this still very conventional approach to air traffic management, but we need to combine the safety and the modernity to go to the next level. And that's really where we have expectations. Many governments have to be involved, regulators, OEMs, pilots, obviously airlines, and that's always the complexity of having that many stakeholders to agree on a change. But still, that's the challenge. One of the challenges we have ahead of us that would come with more safety, more reliability, punctuality of the flights, less fuel burn, less CO2. There's only positive sides. We need to go for it.
There's only upsides. That's marvelous. That's wonderful. Can I say that's perhaps the most optimistic ending I've had to a Straight Talk so far, and I'm delighted that it was you, Guillaume, that gave it to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree that was genuinely fascinating and a great insight into what's going on the aerospace side of the aviation industry. Our next Straight Talk, by the way, is on the 14th of April at 1100 with Mr. John Holland Kay. We'll be again looking at a slightly different angle in the aviation industry. That is, of course, the part of the airports. John is the CEO of Heathrow Airport, so I'm sure he's got some very interesting things to say with us, to us. So it leaves me only to thank Guillaume again on your behalf, and I shall look forward to seeing you when next we get together on the 14th. Thanks very much, and I wish you a very good day.